The planet with the best beaches in Star Wars was the last place in the galaxy you would actually want to live. Scarif had warm oceans, island chains, and the Death Star plans sealed in a vault underneath. Officers posted there treated the assignment as retirement. According to the Rogue One Ultimate Visual Guide, civilians never set foot on the sand, but Scarif was obvious about what it was. Other planets hid the danger better. Niamos drew the kind of people nobody would come looking for: soft sand and blue water, the kind of weather that pulled drifters and tourists hoping to disappear for a while. In Andor, Niamos was a world where people came to keep their heads down. It had drawn low-profile visitors for years, people running from deaths or bad decisions, or just the weight of the galaxy. The very anonymity that made it attractive also made it a perfect trap, a population of loners and strangers with no one waiting for them to come home. The Empire did not forget it. Under the Public Order Resentencing Directive shown in Andor, minor crimes on worlds like Niamos were reclassified into the highest offense category. A charge that once carried a 6-month sentence now carried 6 years. Shore troopers patrol the beachfronts the same way stormtroopers lock down factory worlds. Cassian Andor was stopped on the street for looking like he had been sweating. It was hot. That was his answer. The trooper had a different one. Maybe he had been running. Within hours, a man on vacation was sentenced to 6 years of hard labor at Narkina 5, a prison facility built on the open ocean. Narkina 5 was not just a prison. In Andor, inmates walked on electrified floors that could be turned lethal at any time. Workers assembled components for the Imperial military without knowing what they were building. The 6-year sentence was not only punishment, it was a supply line. The climate never changed. The law did. Before the crackdown, a retired freight captain or a worn-out smuggler could have lived quiet years here without anyone asking where they came from. Once the port stayed on the books, nobody could. The weather is still perfect. Everything underneath it is still rotten. Kashyyyk had the strongest warriors in the galaxy, and it still lost everything. Wookiee civilization, as detailed in the Legends Essential Guide to Warfare, stretched across 7 ecological levels inside rocher trees that grew several kilometers tall. Most settlements sat on the highest level. Even the bravest Wookiees rarely ventured below the 4th. Below that lay the Shadowlands, where predators grew larger and more deadly with every layer of descent. The ground floor was a death trap most Wookiees never saw in their lifetimes. Wookiees fought like few species could. In Revenge of the Sith, they defended their home world alongside Republic clone troopers at the coastal city of Kachiro, holding off a full separatist invasion. Kashyyyk sat near the so-called foundry of the Confederacy, at a junction of hyperspace routes the separatists needed to prolong the war, as noted in battles that changed the galaxy. Its position made it a prize. Its people guarded it with a warrior culture built over centuries. Before the Empire, families lived among the rocher canopy the way their ancestors had for generations, hunting and building alongside neighbors who watched each other's children. Because the Empire did not come to conquer Kashyyyk, it came to strip it. The legal groundwork came first. The Empire stripped legal protections from non-human species, reclassifying certain groups as non-sentient to make forced labor legal. As documented in the propaganda reference book, Wookiees bore the worst of it. The occupation, detailed in Aftermath Life Debt, began with a full blockade. The Empire reduced the planet's name to a military designation, G5623, and began forced removal of Wookiees for labor. Adults were shipped to construction projects, including the Death Star and the spice mines of Kessel. Wookiee lifespans stretched for centuries, making them ideal long-term workers in Imperial eyes. Inhibitor chips caused extreme pain or death for any act of defiance. The Empire also harvested the rocher trees themselves for lumber and cultivated Kashyyyk's land to grow food for the Imperial army. Entire sections of canopy that had taken centuries to grow were cut down in months to feed Imperial construction. Imperial propaganda framed the occupation as a security response. The Wookiees had been compromised through their ties to the Jedi Order, or so the official line went. Some officers viewed Wookiee children as either hostages to force compliance or a drain on resources, records the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. Many of those children were absent from later Imperial records. What happened to them was never explained. Survivors kept the memory alive through a 13-hour oral retelling known as The Day the Trees Fell. Strength and terrain did not save Kashyyyk when the value of what it held made the Empire come. The planet is free again now, following the events in Aftermath Life Debt, but living there means building on ground that remembers exactly what it lost. The Wookiees fought back. One planet never got the chance. Corellia built the galaxy's ships for centuries, until the Empire took the yards for itself. In Solo, the planet's identity ran on shipbuilding tradition and the restless independence of its people. The Corellian Engineering Corporation had been one of the galaxy's most respected manufacturers for centuries, its yards orbiting the planet and sprawling across the surface. The YT series freighters, including the model that would become the Millennium Falcon, came out of Corellian shops. CR-90 corvettes served diplomatic fleets and rebel cells alike. Corellian designs were everywhere. A generation of Corellians learned to weld, fly, and engineer inside those yards, and they raised children who did the same. Hot solder and the clang of riveters carried across the docks from Coronet City to the orbital platforms. A Senate bill requesting additional employment on Corellia became the vehicle for the takeover, as documented in the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. Kuat drive yards absorbed the shipyards under the guise of expanding local jobs. Corellian workers stopped building civilian ships. Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters replaced them. Factory exhaust choked the upper atmosphere. The shipyards still ran. They just stopped serving the people who kept them running. Even Corellia's own security force worked against the population. It was meant to protect. Coruscant served as a buffer between civilians and the Empire, absorbing public anger before it could reach Imperial authorities. When Corellians pushed back against the law, they fought their own enforcers, not the state behind them. Long-standing tensions between humans, Solonians, a matriarchal tunneling species, and Drawl, a small, scholarly furred people, had shaped the Corellian system for generations. Imperial Governor Ilipatan of Talos, one of Corellia's sister worlds, exploited that friction to keep the population divided. A Corellian joke captured daily life under Imperial law. When crossing the major transport lanes, the direction you looked in first defined which laws you had broken. It did not matter what you actually did. Everything could be a crime if someone needed it to be. The shipyards produced more tonnage of hull than they ever had under the Republic. Young Corellians without family connections scramble for the few options left: the shipyards, the underground, or the hope of stowing away on one of the vessels they had built with their own hands. Corellia's shipyards still pay if your family already worked them. Everyone else pays a different price or leaves. Industry kept Corellia running, but one planet has more of it and still fails. On Coruscant, your altitude decides whether you ever see the sun. The cityscape ran 5,127 levels deep, numbered outward from the planet's core. Level 1, at the bottom, was uninhabitable. Level 5 was the lowest floor where anyone still lived. Social status on the galactic capital was measured by altitude, as detailed in the Complete Visual Dictionary. The most exclusive residences sat at the top, in towers like 500 Republica in the Senate District. Wealthy beings breathed filtered air, attended performances at the galaxy's opera house, and lived above the clouds. Below them, level by level, the light disappeared. The underworld was devoid of sunlight and choked with toxic fumes from thousands of years of construction. Crime families controlled entire levels, patrolling them with hired enforcers. Death stick vendors preyed on addicts in card parlors. Residents on the deepest inhabited levels had never seen the sky. The Outlander hub sat far below the surface, pulling wealthy pleasure seekers from above and desperate residences from below into the same room. As depicted in the Complete Visual Dictionary, Monument Plaza, one of the only patches of exposed natural mountain peak left on the entire planet, sat on the surface like a relic of a world Coruscant buried under itself millennia ago. Coruscant offered more opportunity than any other world, more jobs, more culture, and more political access than anywhere else in the galaxy, but all of it flowed upward. Over 8 trillion beings lived on the planet at any given time, making it the most populated world in the galaxy. Hundreds of species from across the galaxy shared its levels. Palpatine kept a private box at the Opera, but rarely appeared in public, according to the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. His own museum occupied space on the surface, where a docent led tours celebrating the Emperor's rise from humble beginnings. Directly beneath it, millions lived in permanent darkness, breathing air the upper levels had been filtering and dumping downward for centuries. After Order 66, the Jedi Temple, visible from the Senate District for thousands of years, was redesigned into the Imperial Palace. The building that had once trained the Guardians of the Republic now housed the man who destroyed it. The Empire found a way to make the altitude divide permanent. Citizens had to submit biometric information to access public services through the Chain Code Initiative. Many complied without realizing the Empire was cataloging them to track movements, backgrounds, and daily routines. Imperial prosecutors later used that information to fabricate legal charges. On Coruscant, where altitude already decided your future, chain codes became one more tool to keep the lower levels locked in place. The Republic governed from the top and left the underworld alone. The Empire did the same. The New Republic afterwards as well. Diplomats, specialists, and anyone with old money can live well on Coruscant for a lifetime. Below level 1000, the city is a ceiling everyone can see and no one can reach. Whether you live on Coruscant or just survive it depends entirely on where the elevator stops. One planet survived by staying just outside of the reach of galactic politics. Cloud City floats above a planet where nothing survives on the surface. The city hung inside a narrow, breathable band of Bespin's atmosphere, 392 levels held aloft by 36,000 repulsor lift engines above a gas giant with no solid ground. It needed no airlocks. People on the upper decks walked outside and breathed. Sunsets lasted 2 hours according to Galaxy Guide 2, Yavin and Bespin in Legends. A resort district spanned the top 50 levels, with casinos and attractions that drew visitors from across the galaxy. For most of its history, Bespin stayed out of galactic politics. Cloud City did not fall under Imperial jurisdiction in The Empire Strikes Back. Its administrator, Lando Calrissian, ran the operation as a private enterprise, keeping the Empire at a careful distance. The Baron Administrator could address every part of Cloud City from any central computer terminal using a personal security code, as shown in the complete visual dictionary. One man, one code, one city. A local wing guard handled day-to-day security, but they answered to the Administrator, not to any galactic authority. In Legends, Bespin went untouched during the Yuuzhan Vong War because there was no planet surface for the invaders to reshape. While other worlds fell, Cloud City floated on. Bespin's freedom rested on something dangerously fragile underneath. Cloud City was one big tibanna gas processor. A raw atmosphere came in, impurities went out, and refined tibanna shipped across the galaxy to fuel blasters, engines, and starships. Tibanna was a key component in blaster gas, and Cloud City's entire revenue depended on it. Below the resort levels, Ugnaughts, small industrious aliens long used as cheap labor across the galaxy, ran the processing plants in Legends, doing repetitive and sometimes dangerous labor under red emergency lighting. The Ugnaughts had been brought to Cloud City as contract labor generations earlier when the operation was first founded. Their descendants still work the same floors. The city was a factory dressed as a vacation. When Darth Vader arrived, Calrissian had nothing to bargain with. Vader authorized the full annexation of Cloud City shortly after the Battle of Hoth. Vader intended to seize the facility regardless of the rebel presence. General Calrissian said as much in an interview after the war. Cloud City still rewards anyone comfortable betting their life on one commodity and 36,000 engines. The upper levels offer a lifestyle few Outer Rim planets can match. Live there while it works, and be ready to leave the moment it does not. One planet turned obscurity into something no army could take. If you want to see more videos like this one, a quick subscribe means you will always be first to know. Ferrix ran on salvage, and its people ran on each other. In Andor, workers pull usable components from wrecked ships and broken droids. refurbished them hand by hand, and sold them at markets known across the sector. Salvage yards on Ferrix carried some of the best secondhand parts inventory in the galaxy. A local saying held that if something could not be found on Ferrix, it was not worth finding. Families like the Andors lived inside the cycle. Marva and Clem Andor made salvage runs to scattered worlds, hauling scrap back for refurbishment and resale. Cassian was not born on Ferrix. Marva brought him from Kenari as a child, as shown in Andor's earliest episodes. The community raised him as one of its own. The work was hard and the margins thin, but the economy belonged to the people who ran it. Ferrix sat at the intersection of several hyperspace lanes, including the Hydian Way, which gave its markets access to traffic that much larger worlds could not match. Preox Morlana, a private security corporation shown in Andor, policed Ferrix on the Empire's behalf. Citizens could air complaints at a monthly territorial forum, but daily life was shaped by something much older than any corporation: local custom. A large bell in the town center counted the hours, called workers to shifts, and announced the dead. It rang differently for each occasion. Everyone on Ferrix knew what the bell meant without being told, the way a family knew the sound of its own front door. The Daughters of Ferrix, treated by Imperials as a social club, served as the real backbone of the community. They organized farewells for the dead, they cared for the sick, they kept the memory of the community alive. On Ferrix, the dead do not leave, they become part of the city. When someone died, their ashes were mixed with mortar and local stone dust to form a single brick. The brick was inscribed with the person's name and dates, then set into the wall of the city. Locals called it being bricked. Both Clem and Marva Andor were bricked into the walls of their community. Imperial personnel who died on Ferrix did not receive the same honor. During Marva's farewell on Rix Road in Andor, held in open defiance of Imperial restrictions, her pre-recorded message rallied the crowd. She was a daughter of Ferrix. The Empire was a disease that thrived in darkness. The procession turned into a demonstration, and the demonstration turned into a full confrontation with Imperial troops. As stormtroopers moved in, Brasso, a friend of the family, picked up Marva's memorial brick and used it against a trooper. Imperial troops opened fire on the crowd. The dead were counted in the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. After a botched Preox Morlana operation to capture Cassian Andor, the Empire dissolved the corporation and placed Ferrix under full military occupation. The Daughters kept the community breathing, but an army does not care about customs. After the Empire fell, Ferrix rebuilt on the same customs it always had. For a mechanic, a salvager, or anyone who measures a good life by strength of their neighbors, Ferrix is the right place. Walls only last if someone remembers what they stood for. Lothal remembered, and it rebuilt from what the Empire left behind. Lothal welcomed the Empire's money and paid for every credit. In the years before Imperial occupation, Lothal was a quiet Outer Rim world with open farmland, mineral deposits, and a small but growing capital city. Its economy blended agriculture with light industry and trade. Farmers worked the grasslands, small-scale miners pulled the resources from the planet's distinctive rock formations. Capital City was growing, attracting settlers looking for cheap land and a fresh start far from the congestion of the core. In Rebels, the Empire's arrival was initially welcomed. Factories meant jobs, Imperial contracts meant steady credits. For a planet that had never attracted much attention, the investment looked like a future. It was a trap. The mining guild sent enormous roaming crawlers across Lothal's surface to extract raw materials for Imperial weapons production, as documented in the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. The Empire called them ore crawlers, but Lothal's people had less flattering names. The machines moved on repulsor lift legs, stripping minerals from the ground and partially refining them inside the hull. Farmland was seized to make room for TIE fighter factories. Factory runoff poured into the atmosphere. Thrawn based his TIE Defender production on Lothal, where the planet's mineral deposits fed raw materials directly into the factory line, making the planet both the source and the assembly floor. By the time construction finished, Lothal's fields were scarred with fire, and the upper atmosphere was darkened with industrial waste. In Rebels, Ezra Bridger looked down at his home world and thought it looked like it was dying. Vader's forces went beyond the factories. He ordered a displaced persons camp on Lothal, nicknamed Tarkin Town by its residents, leveled to the ground. Thrawn later brought his own Star Destroyer into the atmosphere and fired on civilian areas to force the local rebel cell to surrender. A propaganda mural in the propaganda reference book replaced Lothal's original skyline with the image of the factory dome as the new civic center. Ezra Bridger's parents, Ephraim and Mira, had run unauthorized broadcasts critical of the Empire from their home, urging their neighbors to remember what Lothal had been before the occupation. They were arrested and sent to an Imperial prison. Neither of them came back. Their son grew up alone on the streets of Capital City, stealing to eat, sleeping in an abandoned communications tower on the outskirts of town. Lothal even had a senator. Senator Domus Ranking spent most of his term enriching himself through corrupt deals and blocking rivals rather than representing the people. Governor Arinda Price eventually had him removed through a bribery scandal. Lothal had representation in name only. Lothal's people did not wait for someone else to save them. The Spectre Cell, originally focused only on resisting the Empire within their own system, had been dragged into the wider rebellion as Imperial pressure grew around them. The response kept growing. First, the ISB sent Agent Callus, then the Grand Inquisitor, then Vader himself, then Thrawn. Each failure brought a heavier response. By the Rebels' finale, 6 Imperial Star Destroyers held orbit above the planet to block incoming support. The Spectres launched an unsanctioned liberation the rebellion never approved. Using Governor Price's own clearance codes, the rebels set off a false evacuation protocol that pulled all Imperial forces into the Dome, the occupation headquarters above Capital City. They destroyed it. The rebellion cited Lothal's success repeatedly as proof the small forces could defeat the Empire, as recorded in battles that changed the galaxy. By the time of Ahsoka, Capital City had been rebuilt into a thriving and open community. Settlers and farmers willing to earn their freedom the hard way would find Lothal worth the risk, but the farmland, the Outer Rim position, and the minerals that drew the Empire are all still in the ground, and every galactic power to come will see them. Lothal survived by fighting. Chandrila tried preventing the fight. Chandrila had calm seas and silver lakes, and the most dangerous address in the galaxy. It was Mon Mothma's home world, a core world with rolling green hills and a population deeply invested in civic life. In Hannah City, the Legislative Commons sat open to the air, and citizens could watch their representatives debate from the steps outside. Chandrilan families grew up attending public forums, and the habit carried into adulthood. After the Battle of Endor, the Chandrilan senator became the first chancellor of the New Republic. Mothma rejected early government artwork that centered Coruscant as the seat of power. According to the propaganda reference book, the new government would be accountable to its citizens above everything else, and the artwork had to say so from the first frame. She chose Chandrila's Commons as the backdrop instead. Mothma championed the Military Disarmament Act, cutting the New Republic's centralized military force by 90%, as detailed in the Aftermath trilogy. People need defense, not democracy. That was the argument. She proposed keeping 10% as a peacekeeping force and dismantling everything else. In Legends, by contrast, ongoing conflicts with Imperial warlords made a similar reduction impossible. The New Republic also chose to rotate its capital world, moving the seat of government between member planets based on elections. Mothma aspired to host a galactic congress on Chandrila, where worlds would vote on how the New Republic would be structured, according to the propaganda book. It was a direct rejection of Coruscant's model, where one world concentrated power for thousands of years. For Chandrila itself, the rotation meant the spotlight would eventually move on. Until then, the planet was first in line. Chandrila's elected government kept order without turning daily life into a military exercise. Its cost was being seen. The Liberation Day celebration in Hannah City was struck by an attack using brainwashed prisoners of war, as depicted in Aftermath: Empire's End. Being the public face of the New Republic drew the kind of attention quiet governance never would have. Good government works until the galaxy notices where you build it. Once the capital rotated to another world, Chandrila stepped out of the spotlight and back into itself. Civic life resumed. Being watched came with the territory, and residents accepted the trade. One planet avoided visibility entirely by being too small and too remote for anyone to find on a chart. Pabu is so small, the Empire has never bothered to look for it. On a remote island far from any hyperspace lane that mattered, a mayor named Shep Hazard knew every resident by name. In the Bad Batch, Pabu sat at the edge of the galaxy, too small to appear on most charts. Most of Pabu's people were displaced families who arrived during and after the Clone Wars, uprooted by conflict, looking for somewhere the fighting could not follow them. Hazard welcomed each of them as family. In the Bad Batch, Hunter and Hazard talked it through. The Empire had no reason to notice a remote island with nothing worth taking. That was the mayor's view, and no Imperial ship had yet arrived to prove him wrong. The island had no factories, no military value, and no rare exports. Upper Pabu sat behind a sea wall with an early warning system built to detect seismic ocean events. The Archeum, a community archive on the upper level, preserved the island's records and shared knowledge. Lower Pabu expanded over the years as more newcomers arrived, spreading settlement down towards the waterline. The name Hazard was a warning the island had not yet had to answer for. When tremors struck in the Bad Batch, the ocean hit Lower Pabu hard. The wave was the first in almost 30 years, but it devastated the lower settlement. Homes flooded and docks tore apart. Hazard personally checked on every resident during the evacuation, making sure each person reached higher ground before he did. Afterwards, the community rebuilt the lower settlement and its seawall side by side, without outside help. Residents shared meals, welcomed newcomers without suspicion, and looked after each other without conditions. Later in the series, Pabu became a refuge for liberated clones as well. Life on the island ran at the pace of the sea and the seasons, with neighbors close enough to hear each other from one house to the next. Displaced families arrived first, retirees followed, and both found the same thing: quiet, warm days, and people who knew their names. Whether Pabu could hold that together across decades and regime changes was the one thing it had not yet had to prove. Pabu offers the most peaceful life on this list, but the least proof. One planet has been invaded, occupied, blockaded, and deliberately targeted for destruction by its own emperor, and it is still standing. Naboo has been invaded, struck, and nearly destroyed, and it is still here. The planet's geography split it between two civilizations occupying entirely different physical domains. Beneath Lake Peanga, the Gungans built their capital, Oto Gunga, using hydrostatic force fields, bubble membranes that kept the water out while staying permeable for swimmers. As depicted in The Phantom Menace, those bubbles housed around 1 million residents, anchored to the lake floor by stone pillars. On the surface, the human Naboo built cities like Theed around art, education, and government, with the plasma refinery complex sitting right beside the royal palace. Naboo's interior was porous, riddled with tunnels and plasma veins that ran through a sponge-like core. Theed itself was built into the landscape, with classical domed towers mirroring the surrounding hills and waterfalls running through the city center. When the Trade Federation invaded, neither population could be wiped out in a single strike. The invaders controlled the surface. The Gungans still held the deep water. Rare plasma extracted from the planet's interior powered blasters and energy systems across the galaxy. But Naboo also supported agriculture and a craft tradition the propaganda reference book calls the idealized zenith of cultural sophistication. A Naboo musician named Paolo Gemabi was imprisoned at a labor camp by the Empire for a performance his criminal record described only as subversive, according to the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. Even under occupation, the culture resisted being erased. Rural communities in the Lake Country, the region where Padme Amidala retreated in Attack of the Clones, kept those same traditions alive from before the Clone Wars through every occupation that followed. The monarch of Naboo served term-limited elected terms, as laid out in Queen's Shadow, and voters often chose leaders as young as 14 because the culture valued uncorrupted judgment over experience. That preference put a teenager on the throne when the Trade Federation blockade hit. Naboo's real case is not what it built, but what it survived. The Trade Federation blockaded the planet, cutting off food imports, then invaded with a full droid army. As recorded in battles that changed the galaxy, Theed fell quickly. Citizens were placed in prison camps. A previous monarch's isolationist policies had left Naboo with few nearby allies, and a recent labor shortage meant that the planet had planned to source most of its food from off-world imports. When shipping stopped, Naboo had few reserves. Crops had been left to rot in the fields. After 7 days, food stores ran low, but the 14-year-old queen refused to give in. Naboo survived because two civilizations that had avoided each other for generations chose to fight together. The Gungan Grand Army drew the droid forces onto the Great Grass Plains as a decoy, while Queen Amidala's team retook the royal palace. The Gungans were outnumbered, outgunned, and losing when a single N1 starfighter destroyed the droid control ship from inside. The N1 was a reflection of Naboo culture itself, a fighter that balanced purpose and elegance, as described in the same book, handcrafted by a society that brought artistry to everything it built, even weapons of war. There were never enough of them or enough volunteer pilots to fly them. After the invasion, human-Gungan relations changed. The two civilizations that had spent centuries avoiding each other kept the alliance they had built under fire, trading openly and cooperating on planetary defense in ways neither had done before. Decades later, Palpatine made sure the planet paid for it. The Empire stationed the 209th Stormtrooper Division on Naboo for most of its existence, near the Emperor's private retreat, according to the Rise and Fall. Officers informally called a transfer to the 209th a Crimson Order, viewing it as a path to the Imperial Royal Guard. Palpatine also kept a small countryside retreat on Naboo, but whatever he did there remained a mystery. After the Empire fell, New Republic forces found the building stripped of all equipment and records before anyone could examine it. 20 days after Endor, the Watch became something worse. Operation Cinder, depicted in Shattered Empire and Battlefront 2, targeted Naboo with climate disruption satellites. The first 3 Class 5 Hurricanes formed within hours. Another dozen were building behind them. The satellites were designed to keep producing storms until the surface was scoured clean. Palpatine's final order was the destruction of his own planet. Queen Sosha Saruna, a trained fighter pilot, flew alongside Leia Organa and Shara Bey in salvage N1 starfighters, all fighters hidden during the Clone Wars and preserved after Naboo voluntarily demilitarized. Calrissian's fleet arrived in time to help destroy the satellites before the storms became unstoppable. Naboo joined the New Republic. It balances what other planets chose between art and agriculture, city life and countryside, tradition alongside elected government, invasion, occupation, and a dead emperor's vengeance could not break it. Theed still stands. So do the people who built it. If the question was which planet you would actually live on, the answer is the one that keeps rebuilding what history keeps trying to take. But every planet on this list sits inside the mapped galaxy. Beyond the Outer Rim, past the edges of every chart and hyperspace lane, lies a region so dangerous that thousands of years of exploration have failed to map it. What the unknown regions are hiding, and why everybody has survived long enough to chart them, is a story on its own. So watch this video to find out.